Hey there, what is up you guys? I am Jerry Lai and welcome back to my sports photography channel. For those of you joining me for the very first time, I currently serve as the Director of Content and Photography at USA Today Sports, and I've been lucky enough to have been a photojournalist and photo editor for over 16 years. My goal for the channel is to help you become a better sports photographer. And today I'm going to try to achieve this by answering your most frequently asked questions. As this channel has picked up a little bit of steam the past few months, I receive a lot of comments, DMs, and even emails regarding sports photography. I do my very best to answer them when I receive them, but I know sometimes not everybody sees the replies, so I thought it'd be a good idea to start my very first Q&A session here. So with that, let's dive right in. Probably not surprisingly, the most frequently asked question that I receive is how to become a sports photographer. Now, I'll save the full details for a regular full-length video, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes version here. And not surprisingly, becoming a sports photographer is probably the same as becoming anything else in life. And to achieve that goal, you need to network, you need to continue to educate yourself, and of course, you need a pinch of luck. Sports photography is a pretty small field, but it is kind of hard to make a name for yourself on your own. It does help a lot to network with other sports photographers that you see at your events, but networking alone will not cut it. You also need to be professional about how you carry yourself. That means being courteous, following all rules, and being known as a reliable person. Because if you're none of those things, the people that you network with will not be inclined to help you out at all. Now, the second thing you need to become a successful sports photographer is you need to be able and willing to educate yourself. This may involve studying other photographers in your area and seeing how they approach and photograph a game. And it also means being able to receive constructive criticism for your takes. Now, I know as a photographer, sometimes you can get some blinders with your images. So without someone besides yourself evaluating your content, it's difficult to grow. Now, of course, the third ingredient to becoming a sports photographer is, as I said, a pinch of luck. Sometimes it just helps being in the right place in the right time. Now, in my situation, I was very fortunate in that in the mid-2000s when I got started, there were not one, but two openings with the wire services in my area, and I was able to sign on to each. Anyways, like I said, that is an extremely abbreviated version of how to become a sports photographer. Definitely check out my full-length video on this topic when it drops. Now, the next question that I want to touch on is something that a number of you commented on my manual settings for sports photography video. And you guys were asking, what is the lowest shutter speed you could use for sports? Because as a number of you pointed out, that my default setting of 1/1600th of a second sounds great and all, but it's not super realistic for those of you without high-end gear or those of you consistently shooting in high school or very dark venues. And yeah, that's absolutely true. I understand that shooting in pro venues with top-of-the-line gear, 1/1600th of a second can be a luxury. That said, it should be used as a starting baseline. And there are actually times that I do drop below that for my shutter speed when shooting sports action. And that is in venues that are very dark, or if I'm using cameras that are a generation or two older. You drop the shutter speed in these cases because it allows you to shoot with a lower ISO, thus your images will not be as noisy and grainy. Now, if you back up a few years and I was regularly using the 1D Mark II or 1D Mark III, you'll see that I regularly shot baseball games at 1/800th of a second or 1/1000th of a second. I also frequently shot basketball at 1/800th of a second. Now, truth be told, this does freeze almost all human movement. There are some notable exceptions, like when the pitchers throw, their arms will be blurred, and of course when batters swing their bats, the bats will be blurred at 1/800th of a second. However, when people are just running the bases or going up for shots, they're generally frozen in place. Now, what about in the darkest of dark venues? When I first started out, there were a couple high school games that I shot where I dropped my shutter speed all the way down to 1/400th of a second. If I didn't do this, I'd be shooting at well over 12,800 ISO. So in order for me to even expose the images properly without a ton of noise, I had to drop my shutter speed to that level. Now, unfortunately, I didn't retain the high resolution images from these shoots back then, but if you were able to inspect these closely, you'll see that there is quite a bit of fingertip blur. Now, fortunately, the bodies themselves seem to be frozen in place, but on close inspection, you will lose a lot of photos due to motion blur. Ultimately, the shutter speed that you settle on will be highly dependent on your lighting conditions at your ballpark as well as your gear. So 1/1600th of a second is my starting point, but there was a time where I regularly shot at 1/800th or 1/1000th of a second. And when you're truly desperate, you can drop down to 1/400th of a second. Just understand the trade-offs when you drop your shutter speed that low. The next question that I want to answer is, why do I have 3 rules for great sports photos? So if you may recall, I did a video early on talking about the 3 golden rules of great sports photography. And those 3 rules were, you need faces in your photos, you need the ball, and you need some action. Now, again, to be clear, even though I called them golden rules, they're really more like guidelines and things that you should try to follow in an ideal situation. If you're shooting editorially and are just looking for one single standalone photo, or submitting to a contest, or submitting for your own portfolio, then photos that follow these 3 rules tend to have the most impact and stand out to the viewers. However, you need to let your assignment dictate what you're trying to shoot. For example, if you're trying to illustrate a sense of place and the grand nature of the venues that some of these sporting figures play in, then you may be shooting from behind. Or you might be shooting for a card company and you don't need peak action, you just need good stock in their stance photos. So again, the 3 golden rules are more like guidelines. The next common question that I want to touch on is about back button focus. A number of you have mentioned in my back button focus video and asked me, when using back button focus, do you need to continually hold down the AF button in order to activate the autofocus? And the answer to that is yes. You must continually use your thumb to hold down the AF button to engage the autofocus. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but after a game or 2, it'll be second nature. For those of you who don't currently use that setup, definitely check out my video on this topic and I'll explain the advantages of why you should do that. And the final question that I want to address today is regarding the SportsShooter Academy photo contest. And the question that I received was, does the photo for the open category have to deal with sports during the pandemic? And the answer is both yes and no. Yes, if you want to be eligible for one of the think tank prizes or the 12 months of photo shelter. However, the answer is no if you're simply looking to register for the SportsShooter Virtual Academy. For those of you who missed my shorts video about the SportsShooter Academy contest, click the link below because the deadline is coming up on February 28th. Anyways, contest aside, I actually do really think it's worth signing up because you'll have access to 2 days of great speaker events. There's going to be a number of featured panels, one including myself and my colleague Andy Scott, where we will talk about the future of freelance sports photography during COVID and post-COVID. There will also be discussions about women in sports photography, as well as speakers talking about their firsthand experience about what it was like covering the Super Bowl during the pandemic, or what it was like covering the White House during the pandemic. You definitely want to check it out, and you don't want to miss it. So I hope to see you all there. Once again, click the link down in my description below, and you'll see some registration and contest info. Anyways, I think that will be a wrap for my very first Q&A session. I hope you all found this very helpful, and if you did, as always, I'd really appreciate if you hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed already, hit that big red button and subscribe. Thank you very much as always for watching today. I've got a regular full-length video coming out again next week, so you don't want to miss that. Until then, stay safe, and I will see you all next time. Bye now.